All right, folks, let's take a look at making different kind of mobs. In this video, I want to show you a bit about how I use superclasses and subclasses to do this. I don't require you to do it. It's not going to be in the criteria for the project, but it's the work smarter, not harder way of doing things. That's sometimes more intimidating to try to do, but it turns out to be pretty sweet. I'll show you what I mean. So here's my mob class. Just to let you know, my mob class has changed a bit, but only to make it more generic, more general, more formulaic. Instead of having everything hard coded, everything now is variables so that it can be adapted. So, for example, I always had these variables, x, y, vx, vy, but now I have a diameter variable. I think it's diameter. So now I don't just say like the mob is 40 or whatever it used to be. I set that variable. And then I don't just fill with specific colors. I have color variables, and I fill with those instead. I have a speed, variable value. That's for, when I kill the mob, how much money does it give me? That's the story there. So these are now all the variables inside of it, and you can imagine how that's changed your code. I think speed is probably the only one that really is not obvious in how it's changed the code. If you want things to be faster, it's a little bit tricky because we're reading in the nodes. So let's just jump down there. Nodes sub I dot. I think it's vx times speed. Let's go jump down to that code. Yeah, so here's my ax function. And so the way I'm applying speed is this is fine code. This tells us basically our direction, but then I times it by speed. So if speed is 0.5, I go half as fast. If speed is 3, I triple the speed. That kind of thing. So that's the story. And then let's see. Let me think about what else you need to know about. So it's basically, you're just going to change your show function, your ax function, to now accommodate these variables, and it's just more general. And then you can turn mob into a superclass. Once you've sort of made things general, it can be made into a superclass, and you do that in another class. Like here's my mob class. I'm using the keyword extends mob. So when I say extends, what I'm saying is mob is the superclass to chunky mob, which means I'm basically building on top of mob. Like chunky mob has everything mob has. When I say extends, I'm saying copy, like don't actually copy and paste, but invisibly copy and paste all your instance variables and all your behavior functions and put them in here invisibly. Like this is all the class is, but they're all available here. The chunky mob has an act function. It has a show function. It has those things. It has mob's version of them. So I don't have to write them again. See how I mean by it's this. These work smarter, not harder. You gotta learn some, somewhat fancy new keywords, but it saves you from writing entire functions. And because mob's functions have been made more general, it'll work for chunky mob. And notice that there is a little bit more technical stuff. There's a super keyword. Super just means call the superclass's constructor and send it these values. So basically, super here is just calling the mob's constructor. And whatever the mob is doing, it's just going to do those things too. And I probably should make the mob constructor just better, but I didn't. I just called super, and then I override the values. So although the super class's constructor is setting certain values for a regular mob, I didn't just overwrite them and just say, well, actually, chunky mobs have a D of 80, and this is their hit points, and this is their value, and these are their colors, and that's their speed. And that's really the only thing I got to do. Once you make mobs kind of generic, and their constructor just sort of fills in those data values, then you can extend it and make a constructor that changes those data values, and now chunky mobs are a whole new thing. I also have speedy mobs that do basically the same thing. It's just a constructor and different values. So once you've done that, how do you make a chunky mob? Because chunky mob extends mob, you can stick chunky mobs and speedy mobs into the mob list. You don't have to make a new list to cycle through those. So if you were to take a look at my play, let me think about this. That would be in the next wave button. I don't know. Oh, I'm gonna be cruising. I don't know. That's no good. Let's just look on this page. Next wave. I'm pretty sure it's the next wave button. Next wave.show. Yeah, here we go. So here's where I click, to add a wave. That's great. So here's me adding a wave. You've all seen this from Checkpoint 2. This is where I add, a bunch of mobs depending on how large our wave number is, and I use that loop to do that. So that's how I add in regular mobs, and we've all done that in Checkpoint 2. So now how do I add chonky mobs? Same kind of idea. I say mobs.add new chonky mob. It's no different. Nothing different at all. That is how things will continue to work. And that's the way speedy mobs will work as well. And it works that way. I can say, mobs.add because chonky mob is a mob. It extended mobs. So it goes in the mobs too. It can work. And it'll just work from here. It'll just work just like how you add a new mob. Chonky mobs will just start working too. So that's a beautiful system. Okay, so that's the end of the story. I hope that is going to make things easy for you and gives you a chance to try out that way of doing mobs. Using a superclass and a subclass. But, if you have a different way of doing it or you prefer to do it a different way, no problem. That's not a requirement, but I think it's pretty great. So try it out if you have the time, energy, and courage to give it a shot. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.